الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا فمن يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ثم أما بعد ما شاء الله السلام عليكم. I want to thank everybody for tuning in with us this evening. We have a special guest in the building. Well, technically not in the building, but in the figurative building, because we're about to do some building, inshallah. We have Dr. Meraj Mohiuddin, a practicing anesthesiologist, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yes, a practicing anesthesiologist in Arizona, the Tempe area, correct?
Yeah, Tempe, Scottsdale, Phoenix area.
Tempe,
yeah.
Scottsdale, Phoenix.
Exactly.
And the author of the widely used and tremendously beneficial book of Sirah, Revelation. And just as important as both of those, a dear friend of mine, a dear supporter of our work at Alim. And I'm honored, first and foremost, to be able to look at him, because we haven't had, I don't know if you would call this a face-to-face exchange, but it's a screen-to-screen exchange.
Yeah.
We haven't had even that in quite some time. So I'm honored. It's good to have you, brother, man. How have you been through all of this?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. I'm so good. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to see you, and I had to hold myself back from calling you the last few days because I thought it'd take away the spontaneity of it all. So I was like, I'm going to limit myself to texting you so that I can actually see you for the first time and make it like a real chat, inshallah. So I'm just very honored to be here. This is Alam is my home, so I always feel comfortable.
Alam is certainly your home. Alhamdulillah, Alam is certainly your home. Man. Alam is certainly your home. So let's go straight to it. I mean, I was going to regale people with stories of your exploits with the bow and arrow. Dr. Meraj is a lover of archery and a practitioner, but that perhaps will come at some organic point in this discussion, or will be another topic for another day. But today I want to talk to you about your book. I know you have some questions for me as well, but it's not every day that we see someone that is a practicing physician, put together a compilation about really anything, non-medicine related, but certainly not a book of Sirah. How did that happen for you, man?
I mean, for those of you who don't know the story, like very briefly, I'm a physician and I didn't have any, I don't have any traditional background in Islamic training. And so I found that was my biggest weakness, but as I'm finding now more and more, and hopefully we can get into this, that's actually my biggest strength, is that I'm a layperson. I have not studied traditional Arabic, and that was nerve-wracking for me when I was putting out this book, ultimately at the end of that part of the journey. But what I'm realizing is that I do feel like I have my finger on the pulse of people who are not scholars and who are not having any plans to go chase traditional scholarship. And I kind of feel like I understand their needs, and that's something I want to talk about. But I was a med school student. I finished medical school, and I was just frustrated because I knew so much about medicine and I didn't know my deen the way I wanted to. So I was like, I need to study Quran. I want to study Quran and know this book inside out the way I know microbiology. And in that journey, I realized the Quran was really hard for me. It was just like super hard to like be moved by it. Like I could read words, but like I wasn't connecting. And then, as I typically tell people, it's like Surah Fatiha, Surah Baqarah, Surah Ali Imran. It's like, whoa. Too much, too soon. Insurance, fighting, jihad. I felt very overwhelmed by that. And time again, my entire life, I try to read cover to cover, like coast to coast, go on the Quran, fly over, and I can't do it. Like by Surah Ma'idah, I'm just like, it's like mile number 4 of a marathon. I'm like, I can't do 21 more miles of this.
Yeah, so exactly.
That's always been my journey. It's not going to happen. And so I was just like, I'm not stupid. And, Allah is not like a mean professor. And that stuff is like in our heads. Like, I don't know, I'll speak for a lot of people. We have this weird thing, like Allah doesn't want us to get the Quran. It's like too hard. And like, Only if you have a PhD, you can start opening up this book. It's like a book on thermodynamics. Like, why would Allah write a book on thermodynamics for the layperson? So I was just like, it can't be that hard, because the companions were, you know, we speak with respect of the companions, but when they came into the journey, they came from so many different walks of life, and, you know, they weren't like all, you know, ulama. When they came in, they were moved. I was like, why is this not working for me? And that's when I realized that, oh, for me, my secret to unlocking Quran, that was my hypothesis, which is proving to be pretty true from my personal experience, is that for me, the secret of unlocking the Quran is through being best friends with the Prophet. And so I call that the Abu Bakr plan, the ABC plan. So it's like ABC, Abu Bakr coaching, and it's like ABC. It's like just start like a baby. So you start from step one, and the Abu Bakr coaching plan is just spend time with the Prophet, peace be upon him, and when revelation comes to him, it comes to you. You don't go to revelation. Revelation comes to you. And when I took that organic, chronological approach to the Quran, like just like mind-blowing openings, and so that's kind of it. And then, you know, so I was just taking notes. Those notes ended up turning into revelation. That's kind of the story of the book. But I think it's like what I would love to talk about. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, it's really mind-blowing that you describe such a momentous journey in, you know, very kind of quotidian, very normal kind of terms. I mean, when I was privileged because you allowed me to view the book before it was released. I was blown away. I had never seen the material of the seerah covered and disseminated in such an accessible way. It made the seerah for me, because when I would study like traditional Arabic sources, I was reading either, you know, a lot of riwayats, a lot of narrations, and you're looking at all of these narrators, or you're reading like a story, but in terms of really grasping the material beyond just kind of the chronological flow of events, that didn't happen for me until I read your book. When I read your book, it was like, okay, now I'm seeing how this event relates to the event that precedes it and the event that succeeds it. Like, okay, now I'm beginning to kind of like contain the material, which is better than just covering the material. The other thing, so as not to, you know, give yourself, you know, short shrift, is that, you know, your book is, for all intents and purposes, it's a compilation. It's a compilation. I mean, you're compiling reports of seerah, and you are, you know, you do interject and you ask, you know, compelling questions, you know, here and again, but it's mostly the data that you are displaying. And we have to remember that the most famous works of classical Islamic scholarship were compilations. When we talk about like Riyadh al-Salihin, this book authored by Imam al-Nawawi, and this is something that a lot of people don't think about, because in this you see some of the sophistication of our tradition. When you think about Riyadh al-Salihin, right, this book, you know, that was compiled by the great scholar Imam al-Nawawi, that is, you know, a touchstone. It's on everyone's, you know, bookshelf, right? It has very little original. Nawawi is not, it's not like other works where, like Sharh Muslim, you see a little bit more kind of organic and original intellectual kind of output from Nawawi, saying, I think this means this and this means this. He's really just getting hadith from Bukhari and Muslim, but where his brilliance is shown is how he's arranging them. It's just the way that the material is being arranged. That is his only role. He's saying, like, these are hadith that relate to this topic, but his selection of the hadith, his arrangement, right, his categorization, him putting this hadith in this chapter, it's opening eyes. People are saying, I never thought about that hadith as being related to that. But I guess it is related to that. And it's related to another two hadith in that same section. So there's an understanding that he's giving, but it's so passive, it's so subtle. It's not like a book of original authorship. It's like I'm showing you what I think, but just in the arrangement and presentation of the material.
And the arrangement, right, exactly.
And that's what you did with Revelation. Like, I'm showing you what I think, right? But I'm really showing you through my arrangement and presentation of the material.
Well, I mean, I was from the very beginning, I was so aware of the fact that I'm not someone to be authoritatively commenting on anything. So that was like, that's the thing that's like the most, I was most keenly aware of as I was writing my book. So I didn't want my voice at all in the book. And I just wanted to be like, okay, this is the best scholarship that I can find at this time. Now, granted, I started this in 2002. The reality is there's even better scholarship now that wasn't there when I wrote my book, which is why I'm in the second edition rewriting the book. Because I'm like, oh, there's so much better material now that's just, I mean, if you just look at this Ramadan itself, there's so much material like has come out this Ramadan. So it's a constant process. And this is something I'd actually talked to Dr. Omar about, is just making it a platform where we're constantly updating it with the best and the best of the material. But like you said, for me, this was a book that I wrote for myself and like my brother and like my peers. Okay. These are two, you know, I'm talking about, like, my target audience has always been motivated Muslims or people who are motivated in general, but aren't yet motivated about their deen, but might be. For those people, this is not for the scholar class. You know, I was always very clear about this. Like, you guys have all of your Arabic and you have all of your mukhtasars and all of your like seerah. And
I gotta stop you
this
there.
stuff.
It's for me. The book is definitely. I don't consider myself of the scholarly class, but I've taught that book. I've read that book. I've shared that book with friends of mine, colleagues of mine, and we've all marveled at how accessible the material is. It's really an amazing work of scholarship.
Well, I mean, I don't know
how you may not consider yourself a scholar, but the book is an amazing work of scholarship. Right?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Alhamdulillah. But you know, this brings up something that I want to talk to you about today. Okay. Because this has been on my mind, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Okay. Couple of things. So the first thing, and I don't know, maybe this is just me. I don't know. I would love to. I don't know how we do this in the comments, if people can vibe and say, yeah, you know, this, I agree with this or whatever. Because I'm curious to see if I have my finger on the pulse of the community right now. But there are like some tensions that have been going on. In my own experience, after I published the book, for example, okay, I'll just start talking, and hopefully this will kind of come together and make sense. Okay, so the first tension that I have experienced is, you know, I've definitely gotten blowback from people who were like, wait, you don't know this, you didn't study this, you didn't do this, why are you writing about this? You know, did you read this source? Did you read this Arabic thing here? Did you do this and did you do that? So I've definitely gotten blowback from like the high, you know, I don't know.
Sure.
You know, I'm not going to
that's something
whatever.
that can,
and I'm sure. And alhamdulillah, most of their critiques are stuff that I actually had already decided I want to make different changes for in my second edition. So I actually felt like that's great, like, because I'm on the right trajectory in terms of how I'm trying to shape this vision. But what happens is that, you know, for example, so I launched this YouTube series this Ramadan, where I'm just taking people through the seerah, like very basic, to me basic, but obviously it's complicated. Most people don't know seerah, unfortunately. So we go through the prehistory and the Arabs and the Lahmids and all this kind of stuff. And I want to make as much Quran, just push as much Quran as possible with this incredible recitation. And in the process, I had to explain what the Quran is saying, right? Like if we're talking about Surah Al-Fil and the elephants came, and then, you know, we're establishing the Arabs, the Meccans, Allah is putting them on the map now, and this is the divine plan, or whatever we're talking about. There gets this thing of, you know, brother, be careful, because now you are explaining Quran to people. And in our tradition, we don't teach Quran unless you have the ijazah to teach Quran. You see what I'm saying? So there's this element of like, you got to be very careful, brother, because, you know, what is your qualification to start teaching Quran? And on the flip side, I feel like if I'm in my 40s now, if I can't explain Surah Al-Fil in a basic way, like then I have, like if we don't feel that we can't explain Surah Al-Fatiha and Surah Al-Fil, and if we don't feel that we are comfortable enough to read the Quran and say, look, these are the major points of Surah Al-An'am, this is the major points. If we feel like we don't feel, then there's a problem also. And so I wanted to throw this at you and see what your thoughts were on this tension, because I feel like there has been a, you know, whether conscious or subconscious or whatever, there has been an offsetting of responsibility on the layperson to own Quran. for themselves. Because it's like, unless I go through it with the scholars, how dare I open up the book in Arabic or in English, because I don't know all the root words for this and that. How dare I study the Quran on my own? And I'm kind of pushing back on that with this whole mindset of respect for the scholarship. I'm always looking, I'm studying the scholars. I'm not saying like, let me see what I can make of this meaning. I just want to study a lot of scholars. But I just feel like a lot of people don't know any Quran. And I wanted to talk to you about, what are your thoughts on this? About like, how much are we allowed to be like, isn't Allah talking to all of us for those who think? Isn't he talking to me? Or is he talking to the sheikh who now has to say for those who think, you know? And I wanted to ask you about that.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, a few things come to mind about that. You know, the first of them is that you're absolutely right. The Quran is meant to be read. It's meant to be reflected upon. It's meant to be pondered. It's meant to be discussed by the people to whom it was revealed. And we don't have this idea that the ulama are intermediaries between the people and the book. That's not, you know, if you look at Imam Bukhari's Jami' al-Sahih, Sahih al-Bukhari, you know, it's broken down into chapters. The smallest chapter is probably the book of tafsir, where the Prophet ﷺ himself gave tafsir on very few verses. And the thing that I say to people that, you know, make this the exclusive preserve of scholars to interpret the Quran, I say, if authoritative interpretation of the Quran was the fundamental that you're claiming it to be, then the Prophet ﷺ would have spent the bulk of his time interpreting the Quran. You know, most of his statements would have been interpretations of the Quran. But the fact of the matter is that the greatest explainer, the greatest sharih, the greatest interpreter of the Quran is the behavior of the Prophet ﷺ, not him sitting and giving formal lessons on exegesis. The second thing is that you even have instances where people read the Quran, arrived at their own conclusions. And when the Prophet ﷺ was informed about those conclusions, if those conclusions were incorrect, he simply corrected them. But in no place does he say, how dare you read the Quran and even arrive at your own conclusion. So one that is particularly relevant to Ramadan, and we just came out of Ramadan, is the famous Sahabi, radiallahu anhu, Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman. When he read كُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ الْخَيْطُ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ مِنَ الْفَجْرِ. Eat and drink until the light thread becomes distinct from the dark thread. Right? خَيْطُ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ. When the light thread becomes distinct from the dark thread. Hudhayfa read this and he thought that this was literal. So he literally took two pieces of yarn. He's looking at a dark piece of yarn, a light piece of yarn, and he's like comparing them. And he's so into this activity that he's spotted by the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet asked him, Hudayfa, what are you doing? And he said, Allah said, eat until the light thread became distinct from the dark thread. So I have a light thread and a dark thread, and I'm trying to figure out what's meant by that. The Prophet laughed. And he said, Hudayfa, this is a reference to dusk and dawn. But in no place does he say, Hudayfa, this is why you can never read the Quran on your own. This is why you must come to me. Because if you don't come to me, you arrive at silly, fallacious conclusions like that. But he didn't say that. Right? And then the third thing is, you know, and this is more of a kind of a social historical perspective. I think some of the ulama are still adjusting, and I mean over the last 100 years, adjusting to a culture of mass literacy. You see, a lot of you know, they're still adjusting to a culture of mass literacy. You know, in our tradition, and I would never disparage the Islamic tradition. I mean, the Islamic tradition is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the deepest and most trenchant traditions of human knowledge that exist in the world, right? I mean, just one body of literature that countless men and women just gave to and gave to and gave to through the ages.
Yes.
However, for a large part of that history, they were the only people who could read. So, you know, there was a kind of deference by default. And the distinction between the alim and the ami, the scholar, and the layperson was a very sharp distinction. It was a very sharp distinction. It's like, you know, whereas the distinction that we have in mind when we say scholar and lay is the difference between a person that knows the Constitution fairly well and can offer, you know, an opinion, right, with regard to their life, their rights, and a Supreme Court justice. That's what we mean when we say scholar and lay. We mean I'm no Justice Sonia Sotomayor, but I do, you know, I do have an opinion about the Free Exercise Clause, right? The first, you know, I do have an opinion about the Free Exercise Clause, but I'm no Sonia Sotomayor. That's what we mean when we say scholars and non-scholars. Like, I have an opinion about the word of Allah, but I'm certainly no Qurtubi. You know, I'm certainly no, you know, Alusi, but I have an opinion. And I think that the scholars have slowly adjusted to that. But my thing with the scholars, and this is where, when we're sitting together, I issue the challenge that don't go to where the people are discursively and say, hey, this belongs to me. You'll never win that. You'll never win that. What you should be doing is producing authoritative works of scholarship that show the difference between commendable free-thinking activity and scholarship that's based on precedent. There's a difference.
Here's a problem, though. And then here's like, I remember talking to Sheikh Yasser Qadhi about this at one time, long back in the day. And I said, one of the challenges that we have just from the institutional, like the way it's, you know, created, is that a lot of scholars are busy teaching a lot. You know, I just imagine these are mathematicians of you know, calculus and above. They're very tied up teaching arithmetic right now. And so, you know, and because, you know, it could be that arithmetic actually pays the bills, unfortunately, because we don't have these waqfs and all this kind of stuff for scholarship. And there's like all this tension, I feel like. And this is like, I mean, and this is an unsolicited plug, but this is what, for me, has always been alim special, was that, see, like when even if you look at all the YouTube stuff that has come out in the last 40 days, 30 days, a lot of it, I mean, if you just take a step back and look at it, a lot of it is, let me tell you what. Okay, how do we, okay. Let me go back. This is actually, and I'm not like, my first episode on my YouTube channel was this idea of the 3 circles, right? Like this. And I said that the outer circle, and this is like from like a TED Talk. It's like you have the circle of what, how, and why. And I just feel like a lot of the stuff that's coming from the scholars is a lot of what to the rest of the people. So like, if this is like, we've talked about this bell curve before. This is like the bell curve of like the Muslim community. And this is like the scholars are all here, like in this class right here, the people, the students of knowledge and all this stuff. And then like the rest of us are like right here. Like we're just like trying to make our 9 to 5, change the diapers, you know, that kind of stuff, right? And a lot of what's happening right here is like a lot of this, people are kind of talking to this group right here and telling them, this is what you need to know. So it's like, we're just going to extract out and give you, this is what it is. Which is great, because that is increasing literacy like incredibly. Like people are reading Arabic right now, people know the stories of prophets, and so they know what. The thing is that it creates this relationship where it's like, okay, well, the next thing comes up, we need to go back over here and ask the question, what's the next thing? So there's kind of like this back and forth exchange that's happening right now. And I always felt, and you know, I mean, I know this because I know alim. Alim was not about what. It was never about what. It was never, there's enough other people who are talking about what. Alim was always about why. It even skipped how. which was like the whole mind-blowing thing. You know, you had the testimonials. Oh, the first time I came to an Alam course, it was like Dr. Jackson, Dr. Fareed. I didn't even know what to think when I walked out of there, because I just broke your mind apart and showed you, this is a Lego set, your mind. I want to break it apart and you're going to build it again. And so it's a lot of, it was a lot of why. Like, let's start even beginning with, and which is why I like Alam, is that they've shown that the most powerful organizations, the most powerful people, the most powerful companies, they start with why and they build out. They don't start from what and build in. These are the boring, inspired people who do, and that's how the Prophet was. If you look at the Quran, my belief is the Quran begins from why. The Meccan period is all why. It's not about what. There's no Sharia. There's nothing. It's like, why is this the best operating system for you? So, but my thing is that, why are we not, I mean, maybe I'm being unduly harsh, but there was a lot of what this Ramadan, which is great. And it's easy for us. We love what? A diet of what is easy. Turn it on. Oh, tell me some more things. I feel good.
Very easy. Yeah.
So you get into the culture of like, what's it? Infotainment. It's kind of like infotainment in Islam. It's easy. I feel good about the story. I was moved and I cried.
Well, I mean, this is the dilemma. Well, this is the dilemma. I think that, as you mentioned, you know, what is very easy, and what contains a kind of immediacy, right? It's like, I need.
What's the fatwa? Like, you know, can I do this or can I not?
Exactly.
Can I marry the girl or can I not marry the girl?
Okay, exactly. I think what caters to kind of a technical working knowledge. You know, it's like we are the generation of the For Dummies series, right? Remember all of those books? This for dummies, that for dummies, that for dummies.
Of course.
You know, and a lot of communications theorists, they talk about us becoming technocrats. That it's just, give me a technical working knowledge. I'm not really interested. In fact, when you begin talking about historical development, formation, you get to talking about kind of the mind map of something. I want you to understand this as an operating system. And like, I want you to understand why this works and how each of its parts are related to each other. A lot of people, sometimes they consider that romantic drivel. Like, don't give me all of the romance and just give me what I need. And there is a kind of learner that just give me what I need. And we have been very open about the fact that, you know, there are enough people that do that exceedingly well, and we commend them. But we're really not interested in but as you mentioned, the problem with that is that you develop a kind of dependency. And this is why I'm not bad-mouthing, but this is why you need, there's this constant dependence where it's like, you cannot live life spontaneously because everything that happens is like, I got to call the sheriff. Somebody just told a joke. Can I laugh? You know what I'm saying? You know, it's like, we're really not inserting an ethical compass that can guide people when they're living life on life's terms. I'm looking at people that are more like ideologues, man. Like, you know, I have a strict ideology. I'm looking at the chats right now. And Yasmin Suleiman just wrote, so should everyone be able to explain the why in the middle most circle, which she's talking about this right here, or at least have access to the why? And to me, like, that's the point. Like, Yasmin, I think yes. Now, can everyone? No, because everyone has different capacities and we're all busy and, you know, life and so forth. But you know, Ustadh, we've talked about this forever. My heart is with these people right here. Like, these people, they got their ulama, their sheikhs, and they got their ijaz. I don't know this world. I'm familiar with it, but these people, I think, this is where the beauty of Islam comes from. The artisans, the magicians, the people who truly spread Islam around the world and who gave the gift of a possibility for other people to look at. I mean, of course, not to take away from this, I'm kind of overemphasizing it, but really it's the artists and the writers and the poets and the laborers. This is the people where my heart is at. And that's why I'm kind of fighting. I'm trying to make that case for them. No, you're absolutely right about that, Akhi, man. And you have to remember, you know, if we want our faith to be more than rules, to be more than even just theology, but rather we have a civilizational imperative. We represent a different way of seeing yourself in the world and being in the world. That can only be represented by a broad swath of people. It can't be represented by a very narrowly defined scholarly class. And this is why, you know, I say to people all the time, look, if you look out into your audience and everybody there looks like you in terms of, you know, kind of, we call it the BHI, right? The Beard Hijab Index, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you're speaking to the wrong audience, man. You're speaking to, that's what they used to call preaching to the converted, right? You're preaching to the choir. And those are, believe it or not, those people in all of their beauty, right? And all, I mean, you know, this idea of like Zainul Abidin, like the beauty of the devout worshipers, they can only go so far in terms of making the case of Islam compelling for the world. They can only go so far. Whereas, like you said, the artists, the architects, the artisans, the poets, the homemakers, the community members, the community organizers, the teachers, the spoken word artists, the novelists, you know, these are the people that give us culture. And they make these meanings that we talk about concrete. They turn these kind of abstract cultural ideals into lived realities that people can connect to and say, oh man, you know, there's possibility for a person like me that's not a monk or, a scholar, you know, but I am deeply inspired by these meanings.
But this gets into, okay, so if we're saying that, because this is how I feel, is I feel that we have to give people the why. And that takes time and that's hard. It's not easy, which is why most people want to stay in the circle of what. But like, if you just look at the modern studies, you know, all the business reviews and all that stuff, it's that if you're not starting from here, forget it. You're going to flop or you're going to be mediocre. And if we're representing the nation of the Prophet Muhammad, we got to follow that model of why. So, okay, so we have to give people why, which is why, to me, alam, and there are a couple of them, thankfully, there is more movement towards what alam has pioneered, I think, in the last 15, 20 years since I've known alam. Still not the same. No one's there. No one has that thing that's going on, the culture that's been created here, alhamdulillah. But you have another phenomenon on top of that, is that once you activate this part of the community, and it's getting messier now, the middle part of the community, they need what I remember Dr. Jackson called, he said they need cover from these people.
Yeah.
Meaning
absolutely.
they need the cover to say, look, go and do your thing. Do it. And you will stumble, and you will make mistakes. You might not follow the Sharia perfectly, but that's not your responsibility, because that knowledge is not upon you. That responsibility is upon us. But otherwise, like, you know, I feel this all the time. Even as I'm like editing my second draft, I'm just like, will someone step on this? Will this upset the madrasa folk? Will this? And part of my whole problem, and what I've been liberated by now mostly, is like, who is my audience? And at the end of the day, who am I answerable to? You know, do I have to answer to maybe this madrasa who I know is going to be reading this with a red, you know, pen type thing, or this group who's going to do this, or who am I? And also, like, just the last thing I'll say, and this is the freedom, because this is a whole nother topic we get into, is the freedom to make mistakes. Like, I'm on a journey as an author. You're on a journey as a teacher. Someone's on a journey as a singer. Like, if we look at Yusuf Islam, he's on a journey. And
absolutely.
He made mistakes or not mistakes. But that made him now who he is, who we're all enjoying right now. And this whole call-out culture of like, astaghfirullah, brother, and who are you? Like, the cover, all this stuff is just...
And the thing about it is that when you don't have that cover, you squeeze out any genius that can be in your community.
Yes.
People only express creativity when they feel they have the freedom to do so. And it does not mean that if I see something that I think harmful, or something I think detrimental to progress, or something I think deserves to be addressed with some correction, that cannot be done. But we should do so always morally enriching each other. And especially those that are emboldened to do things with Islam, or with Islam in focus, through which they intend to highlight the beauty of this religion in a very natural, organic way. Personally, one of the things that I appreciate about, cultural creators is that, if you are influenced by Islamic ideals, meaning in your work, they're being referenced in some way, right? Islam is a point of reference for you, but your own experience is also a point of reference for you. I love to see the synergy between those two, because when that synergy is off balance, you end up creating something that's just kind of a crude pastiche of the past. Like this is just kind of a remake of something that would have been at home in Andalusia. This is a remake of something that would have been at home in Senegal. This is a remake of something that would have been at home 10 generations ago in Baghdad. You have to, those should be points of reference that give your work integrity. That, like when the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ana lastu bid'an min ar-rusul," Allah told him to say, "I am nothing newly innovated among the messengers." Meaning I stand on a long-standing tradition of human beings that came before me that were also deeply inspired by this world of meanings. But my offering is something unique that brings into the picture my own experience. And we need that so desperately. And
but that's the thing is...
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go. I want to hear this. I think this is really important for a lot of people.
Ulama either will play a part in enabling that kind of generative culture, or disabling that kind of generative culture. And one of the things that I'm keen to point out is, listen, my job, and I don't consider myself of the ulama like that, but as a representative of Islam publicly, my job is to keep us in conversation with that tradition. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to keep us in conversation with that tradition, treating the tradition as though it has all the answers, that it's our singular point of reference. We need nothing but this medieval tradition. I think that can actually do much more harm than good.
I mean, it's like even if you look at the different madahib, right? They're infusions of where you are, when you are, who you are, with the fiqh of the time. So we have the Hanafi tradition and so we see that our tradition. For me, what this does, and this is the tragedy of it, is that it robs people of expressing their sincerity. Like it robs ikhlas from the message. So people are, I have to parrot what was said there because, God forbid, I infuse the fact that I grew up in the West, or like I like this fashion or these clothes, or I like this thing. I dare not, I have to, clean it antiseptically and present basically a rehash, which everyone could have read from a book. The reality is no one wants that. People want the message delivered with sincerity. And I just feel like I really want to try, and like my personal mission in life is to give this to my boys, and then by extension to my extended family, and then to the community at large, is to give them enough of, there's this quote that's been like my favorite. I mean, I might make this my quote for like the next edition. It's my favorite quote right now. And my brother-in-law shared it with me. And of course, just like in the first book, I used a quote from our wali here in America, Malcolm X. He has this quote that I love. Because if you look at Malcolm X, how many people would have called him out every step of his way?
Oh, of course.
Who he became. Yet all these same people are enjoying what he created. It's like you don't get to have it both ways. You don't get to enjoy the fruits of his labor, or the fruits of Muhammad Ali's labor, or all these other people, Because you were the same people who be like, astaghfirullah, brother, you know that he's saying he's God, and astaghfirullah. You are the same people who would have called him out, and now you're going to enjoy the downstream effect of the entire like good that you don't get it both ways. Either you let people take their journey and stumble and make their mistakes and have a good understanding of them, and then enjoy what the barakah that they bring or not. So anyway, but Malcolm X, he had this quote. He said, I do not pretend to be a divine man. Hang on. He says, getting to the meat of it, I am not educated, nor am I an expert in any particular field, but I am sincere, and sincerity is my credentials.
No, absolutely.
Like,
I mean,
boom.
you have to think about it like this, man. You know, I read a quote from Abdul Hakim Murad in which he said, the new shahada is, there is no Islam but Islam, and Muhammad is the messenger of Islam. You see, we have gotten to the place that we're worshiping Islam, because when you are worshiping God and trying to do so as an ethically conscious creature, it entails being confronted with situations and not knowing what to do, right? You know, I say this often, and I see some Chicago folks coming on. Shout out to my sister, Melissa Westbrook. But I say this often, so I know they've heard this from me before, right? These people know this is like a broken record. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to teach people how to make Salat al-Istikhara. And it said that, I think Anas, or I think it was Anas or Ibn Abbas, one of them narrated the hadith. The hadith is definitely sound. It said, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يعلمنا صلاة الاستخارة كما يعلمنا سورة من القرآن. That the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to teach us istikhara like he was teaching us a verse from the Quran, or like he would teach us a chapter of the Quran. And I remember Dr. Jackson asking me, he said, what does this entail? Right? And he asked me in a very penetrating way. And I think I responded like that the Prophet was very devoted to God. He said, no, it entailed that the Prophet understood that he didn't have all the answers. If he regularly confronted situations in which he had to ask God, what should I do? That means that his Islam was not an Islam of like the instruction manual and, oh, for this problem, look here. For this problem, look here.
Plug and chug, right.
It wasn't that. It wasn't, because when you're worshiping God, there's always competing priorities. I mean, I don't know what to do. And if you aren't regularly encountering that, then you're not really worshiping God in a spontaneous way. You might be worshiping Islam. You see?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think
it's like I see that this is something that there's some cons, there's some pros, there's some harm, there's some benefit. You know, what does that, like, how does one confront life in that real and very spontaneous way? And I think that the scholars have the job
what happens
of enabling that. What do you mean?
So what's gonna happen here? Who's gonna lead? Who's gonna lead in this diagram? Is the leadership gonna come from here?
You know, because really, I think there's a, you know, Miraj, I think there's a synergistic relationship. I think when you talk about leading, I think there's a synergistic relationship. I think one part of that diagram is keeping us in conversation with that tradition, right? Because, you know, we want to be creative. We want to be innovative, but we want to do so with integrity. You know, it's almost like we want to sail the wide ocean, but with the benefit of graphs and maps.
So can I ask you a question? I want to ask you a question real quick, because I want to ask you a question. I want to like tap into that far part of the thing, because I don't have access to that. And I always make this analogy. I was talking to another scholar who I love a lot, and I make this analogy because I'm a physician. You know, I can see physicians being very, and we do get very proprietary about like dispensing medical information. Oh, well, why is a nurse telling people to do that? You know, you should have a doctor say that. You know, it's all institutionalized structures of knowledge and all this kind of stuff. See, and someone mentioned this, and I can't remember who, I think it was Yasmin Suleiman mentioned, she said, I think there's a balance in our tradition where everyone should have access to the why, and there's an encouragement to go beyond that while being fearful to Allah and not crossing the boundaries of misinterpretation. I completely agree with that. I think that's a really important caveat that I think we all here who are in this call, I think they all appreciate that at this point. Is there a fear amongst the scholarly class that, people are, the lay people will run away with?
Frankly, they could be displaced. They could be displaced. I mean, what do we need these guys for? Right? I think, there's definitely some of that there. But I think when people
irony is like we want you more than anything else. We just, you know what I mean? But we want, it's like competition, and which is good. It's a competition. It's like we want the scholars who are going to teach me how to fish, not just give me fish. I want the scholars who are going to teach me how to fish. You know what I mean? Which is why I think, Alam is in
the real benefit of scholarship in terms of keeping us rooted in a discourse is that scholarship recognizes the value of precedent and orthodoxy. Whereas I think someone who isn't as attuned to the dictates of kind of a long discursive tradition, they might say, what about this, and what about this, and what about this, and what about this? But what they don't recognize is that, well, if you say this, you could be undermining this. You see, the scholar is able to see that. See, I think what the biggest difference I see between creative, intelligent contributors to Islamic thought and people that are deeply steeped in tradition is that those contributors, they speak about the issue that pertains to what they're talking about. So if we're talking about seerah, they say, what about this, 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 this? If we're talking about the empowerment of women, it's like boom, boom, boom. If we're talking about, say, race, for instance, boom, boom, boom. If we're talking about, creative business, right? But they might not see the connection of what they're talking about to kind of the grand structure of Islamic tradition.
Yes, absolutely.
You see? So I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about.
Yes.
I remember once I was talking with some critical race theorists, and they were saying, what is the viability of an Islamic liberation theology project, right? This idea of having an Islamic liberation theology, a theology that is focused on the uplift of oppressed people. Meaning is there any viability in that? And they had very good reason to say, look, this would be an honorable way for us to reframe our theological reflection. And I said, well, the problem that you would enter with that is when you get into that kind of reductionism, where every effort, every initiative, every demographic has to have a specific concretization of God, then this idea of Islam being a universal and unifying force is undermined. What I think is better is to leave the universal unifying theologies of Islam intact as they are, and then create within the branches, the furur, create in the practices, create within the branches, and do things within those branches that address your specific context. And I would like to think that this conversation, this set of deliberations, is something out of which the Believers Bailout effort grew. Because when I was talking to Dr. Maryam Kashani, one of the people working very diligently on this honorable effort, and she was saying something she wrote in the chapter of a book that I was reviewing, and I said, I thought that was a bit of a stretch. I thought that was a bit of a stretch. Yeah. And she said, well, you told me to be bold. He said, well, you said, we should be bold. And I thought that was a great, right? She's a scholar of gender studies. She's not a scholar of the Islamic tradition, but what she's doing with the tradition, without even altering, without even approaching kind of the theological fundamentals of Islam, is phenomenal. And it began with her asking
Yeah.
me, we should have an Islamic liberation theology. So I expect the scholars steeped in that discursive tradition to see some of those ripple effects that non-scholars might not be able to see, but they still must be creative and they still must be bold.
I mean, I think, and I'll speak for myself, but I would imagine it's true for most people, is that, you know, I have no interest in being a scholar. Like, I have a dream that would be nice, but the responsibility of that is just like, I don't want that responsibility. So I actually don't want that. I want to, and I think most people don't want that. We have a romantic version of like, that would be great to sit at the feet of so-and-so, and we have, but we don't recognize the arduousness of that task. We know it, which is why many of us haven't gone that route maybe. And also there's a huge responsibility once you have this knowledge that now you have to live by. Knowledge is that, you know, luckily, alhamdulillah, you know things that I don't know, and so I'm innocent of those mistakes I may have made. I think most of us, and this goes back to the why, most of us, and I didn't know this. I mean, honestly, Ustadh, I did not know this until I was like into my late 30s. Is like, why am I Muslim? Like the fundamental question, like, why am I Muslim? Yeah. Why this operating system over any other operating system? I could tell you the answer. Jannah, Jahannam, Ibadat. I can give you all the plug-in words, the macros to fill out the sentence. But like, if you ask me, why did I choose Islam? You know, it's like, did I even take the Shahada yet? I don't even know have I even taken my Shahada yet, even though I was born into Islam.
Dr. Meraj, you are brilliant,
and this is what I think most people just want to take the Shahada. Most of us just want to, for once in our life, on our own, as 30-year-old men or 40-year-old or 50 or 70-year-old people, we want to once say fully, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. That's all we want, most of us. And then express that through the way I take care of my children, or express that through this apartment complex I'm building, or whatever. That's all I want. Like, I don't want to know more than I need to know about the madahib. I like to like do my quick searches and my Wikipedia dive on, you know, Imam Malik and all the fun things. But that's more curiosity and fun. I just want like to beat with Allah. Like I want my heart to beat for Allah. That's all I want. We don't want the scholarship.
And honestly, that's all it really is about. You know, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu, you know, the Prophet ﷺ was once speaking to other Sahaba, and he began by saying, Abu Bakr huwa laysa bi a'lamikum. Abu Bakr is not the most knowledgeable of you. I mean, it would not be controversial to say that his daughter had much more knowledge of the Sharia than he had.
Yes.
That's true.
Yes.
Aisha knew much more about kind of the outward of Islam than he did. He said, wa huwa laysa bi aqra'ikum. And he is not the most learned of you in the Quran. Many people knew more Quran than Abu Bakr, right? Zayd ibn Thabit, Ibn Abbas, Ibn Mas'ud, right? Abu al-Aswad al-Duwali. These were scholars of the Sahaba of the Quran. He said, وَلَكِنْ هُوَ شَيْءٌ فِي صَدْرِ. It's something in his chest. It's something in his heart. And then the Prophet said, if his iman was weighed on one side of the scale and everyone else's iman was weighed on the other side of the scale, his iman would outweigh everybody else's. So this fetishization of knowledge is grossly misguided. It's really not what it's about.
See, but this
said, if you are seeking in your scholarship something other than what Abu Bakr had, your scholarship is only increasing you in delusion.
See, but this is my point, is that this is what we need. This is what we need the scholars for. See, this is my diagram. Now I'm like taking, you can't even see it. I'm like taking notes now of like what you're telling me from the hadith, because you're not telling me what. You told me what, but that's actually about why, which is why this is really important for me. Like, this is what I want from the scholars. Is you just gave me a nugget, and I'm like scribbling this down as you're talking, because like this is it. This is why. This is not what. This is why. You know, it goes back to this quote I heard earlier in the year, and I've been saying a lot on my podcast and stuff like that, is that it's not how, what they say, you know, we all are bragging about, oh, I'm on the 30th juz or the 27th juz, or, you know, I memorized this and so forth. And I saw some quote somewhere, someone said, it's not about how deep you go into the Quran, but about how deep the Quran goes into you.
Allah,
and that's like what I'm hearing from you. That's what I'm hearing from you. It's like, how much did Malcolm know? How much did he memorize to become charged? You know, like my favorite scene in that movie by Spike Lee is the scene where he's just driving to the Audubon hotel room. And it's this quiet, kind of somber scene, and you see the world passing by him. Spike Lee did this awesome thing where Malcolm is, Denzel is still, and the world is moving by.
Yeah,
right. That thing. I was like, this guy is like, he's like walking into his brother. How much does he know about brother? Walking into brother, he didn't need to know that much. He had a sound heart. It's like, that's what we want. The lay people, we just want like, just turn me on, light my fire, light my fire. And you lit my fire just now talking about this. I'm all. My wife's in the other room, and I said, "Why are you talking?" You got me going now.
Look,
you got me going. But,
This is the synergy. Please, Rosina, please, Bismillah, unmute yourself and say anything you like.
Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum salam.
I'm a big fan. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah. I'm actually in the field of education. I study curriculum, and I'm also in Islamic education. So, I mean, this book is just amazing. I just wanted to make a comment about the bell curve. So I think you writing on your paper is very symbolic, because we study like social justice and things like that, and educators in that space have a problem with the bell curve because it the question is, what is it measuring? So if you take the bell curve and say, well, that's technical knowledge about Islam, then it's accurate. But if you're saying the bell curve says who's the best, who's going to Jannah, then it's problematic. So one thing I get from this conversation is that it kind of flattens the curve, and it kind of invites other people to make sense of Islam. And going back to the beginning of the conversation about the Prophet ﷺ's behavior was an interpretation of the Quran. So when we practice Islam, we have to figure out how to interpret our practice, and that has to be in dialogue, in discourse with tradition. So thank you for this conversation.
No, thank you for your comment, mashallah. Dude, I can't believe we were only scheduled to talk for an hour, and I'm just, dude, this is only the beginning. Well, Meraj, we have to talk about how we can do this on some. I know you're a physician. Your career is very demanding.
No, this is my priority. Is however I can support you and Autumn and the work that you guys do. There's just so much return on investment on this than me doing anything else outside of my family. So anything that I can do to serve, to be at service of Autumn and so forth. I'm always. It's the best return for me. Alhamdulillah. There are very few organizations that I feel very strongly about. And Alam is probably in that top 3 organizations. And I just decided to exclusively
just remember us in your dua. For everyone else, please remember us in your donation, inshallah. And we're going to talk about how we can do so. I want to do something with you and Sierra. I want to highlight this beautiful book.
Inshallah. We have plans. We have big plans for you, inshallah.
Yeah, Bismillah. Let's talk soon, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
And thank you everyone for being a part of this. I appreciate it.
Amen. والعصر إن الإنسان في خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر آمين يا رب العالمين. Thank you for tuning into this conversation. Let's figure out how we can continue this, inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay, sounds good. I'll talk to you soon, shortly then.
Inshallah.